Welcome. Don't clap.
I'm confused.
We'll leave that in.
All right. Welcome to the Taped podcast, the most Viceroy podcast in the world. We are your hosts, myself, Michael.
Myself, Michal.
Me.
And this is Otorio. He is our special guest for today's podcast.
So, Alex, how are you doing?
I'm doing very good, thank you.
I'm alright.
And for today's episode of the Taped podcast, we are going to be doing a worst to best. Today, we are going to be doing a pretty short one. We're going to be doing one on Mac DeMarco.
Woohoo.
And he's got He's got 6 projects, 2 mini EP things, 4 albums. And without wasting any more time, let's rank them all. So,
Hell yeah.
what was your number 6 pick, lads?
Mine was Rock and Roll Nightclub.
Mine was Rock and Roll Nightclub.
Mine was Here Comes the Cowboy.
Alright.
You two start since
we'll
you're
start
the
okay.
You two start since you're the Rock and Roll Nightclub boys.
First of all, I want to preface this by saying I think it's still a good album, but there are a number of things that bring it down for me. I think it's a very fun album. It's very lighthearted, doesn't take itself too seriously, and, you know, for me it just lacks a lot of the qualities that made some of his later projects great. The production is very inconsistent, especially the mixing on Mac's vocals. There's a lot of times where he doesn't really sound like himself, and also you're not quite sure if he sounds like himself because the vocal production is just that arse. There's a few tracks here that just don't really have that many unique qualities to them. They kinda are hard to distinguish from other better tracks on the album, and overall it's not that serious of a project. I understand it's his first, but it does kind of show that it is a bit of an amateur attempt.
I wouldn't say this album is bad or in any case is awful. I actually quite enjoy some of the elements of the production, but Mac's vocals sound extremely corny and fake. He tries to sound like Elvis Presley. Well, I think he's trying to at least. This is a major problem, mainly on the first half of the album, as he does switch up vocally to his actual voice on like the back end of the album, which actually is decent enough. So it kind of sounds like a radio show with like skits in the middle of it, which is pretty cool, I guess. I'm not really impressed with this one. I guess we can cut him some slack considering it's his debut, but it doesn't really, like, oh no.
Yeah.
It's just trying to find his sound and style to nail it down, so it'll be sloppy as first. Other than that, there isn't really much to say about the album. It's very short, and Matt doesn't really have his style yet. It isn't bad, it just isn't that impressive.
Alright. I chose Here Comes the Cowboy, and don't get me wrong, I actually do like Here Comes the Cowboy. I think it's really overhated. I do enjoy the kind of stripped back elements of the production. It's pretty different from what Mac DeMarco was trying to do on his previous projects. I think it's very enjoyable, but it is pretty flawed. Like, a lot of the times there are moments where the instrumentals can be a bit redundant, can be a slight bit repetitive, and that goes for some performances from Mac DeMarco as well, especially on tracks like the title track in Choo Choo. It still has that kind of thing that This Old Dog was going for, like kind of blending elements of his normal like jangly sound with you know, like indie electronica, and I think it's pretty cool for the most part. I think it's pretty good. Songwriting isn't as good as I would hope that it would be on this whole front, considering how more songwriter focused that This Old Dog was. But nonetheless, I still think it's a pretty good album. It's just not his best in my opinion.
Understandable.
Okay, worst to best tracks from our picks. I think
my favorite.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I thought we were gonna go in the same order. My favorite was Rock and Roll Nightclub, Babies Wearing Blue Jeans, and Moving Like Mike. And my least favorite tracks were I'm a Man and Only You.
Alright, my favourite tracks were Moving Like Mike and I'm a Man, and the worst is Baby Wearing Blue Jeans.
A bit of a switcheroo there.
Yeah, pretty much.
Alright, my favourite tracks from Here Comes the Cowboy are Nobody, K, and Heart to Heart. The worst is probably the title track or Choo Choo. I don't know what the fuck Mac was trying to go for with Choo Choo. Alright, moving on to our number 5 pick. I chose Rock and Roll Nightclub.
I chose Here Comes the Cowboy.
I chose Here Comes the Cowboy.
I like the little switcheroo.
Yeah. We'll do the same order again.
Okay.
I agree with what you said about this album being very underrated. I still think it's a very good album. I don't think it's his best, but I think it's still overall a solid album. I appreciate the direction he went for with it, and it has some top tier Mac DeMarco song among the track list. It's definitely more of a slow burner when it comes to his discography. It's his most subtle, most retrospective, I feel, release. Some moments aren't as engaging as, previous albums, but I think once you sit with the album, there's a lot to appreciate in the simplicity of a lot of these tracks. They feel very personal to Mac, and overall it's a solid release, and I don't really understand why it got so much hate upon release. I don't think it's his best album, but I don't think it's bad. And tracks like Nobody are among my favorite Mac DeMarco songs of all time, so I think this one's still worth listening to.
This album is Mac's longest album, and in my opinion, probably his most boring album. It mainly focuses on minimalistic production, but the minimalistic production doesn't really fit his style, and doesn't really play to his strengths in my opinion. For example, in the opening track, Here Comes the Cowboy, it's so boring and bland that I could fall asleep to it. Why do I need to listen to 3 minutes of him saying, Here Comes the Cowboy? It comes off very lazy and boring to me. Most of the album comes off as that, to be honest. He loses a lot of personality, and it is very hard to talk about because nothing's actually going on here. There are some kind of nice songs that sound innocent enough for me to like them, and they're like the better tracks on here. I prefer the smoother tracks, and then there is a big highlight for me is Finally Alone. Lyrically it isn't amazing, but in my opinion, vocals sound so light-hearted and sweet that I don't really mind the production on the track. It does have some nice bass on it, however Mac actually rides it pretty well. That's a highlight for me. Most of the songs lack that thing Mac has had over previous projects, and I hope he doesn't go in this direction more. I'll allow it if he masters it. Other than that, there's nothing really else to say.
Alright, I chose Rock and Roll Nightclub, and I do enjoy what Mac DeMarco was trying to do on here, but it is a pretty flawed project. I do think the instrumentation is pretty decent, but there are moments of poor mixing on various instruments, specifically the drums. I think that vocally, first half of the album is just Mac DeMarco doing his best Elvis impression, and it's not really that interesting. It's a kind of distracting, pretty goofy, and that's an aspect to Mac DeMarco. His early music is pretty goofy. And I can respect that, and I can respect that this is his first album, and he's giving us a taste of what he is like. And from interviews, he's a pretty cool person. The last 4 tracks on the album are probably my favorites on here. The first half didn't really do it for me as much. They were kind of uninteresting, and the 2 radio interludes were kind of cool for the aesthetic. Just the aesthetic of you're just chilling in your car, just listening to whatever's on the radio or whatever. And it's alright. I think it's a pretty solid project, but, not his best. There are some really good songs on here, but there are some stinkers as well, in my opinion.
Yeah, best and worst tracks.
Best?
My favorite tracks on Here Comes the Cowboy were Nobody, Finally Alone, Little Dog's March, K, On the Square, and All of Our Yesterdays. And my least favorite tracks were Here Comes the Cowboy and the second part of Baby Bye Bye.
The best songs on Here Comes the Cowboy for me were Finally Alone and actually Choo Choo. I actually really like Choo Choo. And then the
Choo
worst...
Choo's alright.
I don't know. I don't like...
Yeah, I know.
It sounds like a shit Gorillaz song.
Can I And the worst songs are Here Comes the Cowboy and Baby Bye Bye.
Alright. Top 4... Oh, wait, I forgot to say mine. Best tracks on Rock and Roll Nightclub for me are Me and John Hanging On, I'm a Man, Moving Like Mike. Worst is probably the title track. Alright, moving on to our number 4 picks. I chose another one.
I chose another one.
I chose another one.
Woo! Agreement. Okay.
Do you want to go first for the first time, Mick?
Yeah.
Since we all have the same one.
Okay, I'll go first. Another one. It's a short. It's short. It's only 8 tracks. It's very enjoyable. I really like what Mac DeMarco is doing on here. You know, there's mixes of like, you know, the normal kind of jangle pop edge that he is known for, and there's synth tracks on here too that are pretty psychedelic, and I really enjoy what they were trying to do on there, specifically the track Without Me. There's not much like songwriting wise on a lot of these tracks except for Without Me, in my opinion. I think the songwriting on that and that track is really good. I think that Mac's performances were very solid. He was very charismatic, pretty catchy. He had some pretty good moments of vocals and some catchy choruses, and you know, it's what you'd kind of expect from a Mac DeMarco project at that stage. And this was the first one I ever listened to, and this is probably a one that I would recommend like newcomers to listen to, just to like ease them in a bit. And the final track is actually pretty soothing in a way. Like, it's just really relaxing. It's like some meditation type shit. And overall, I think that another one, it's really solid. It's a really good and very enjoyable EP, in my opinion.
Do you want to go next?
Might go next.
Yeah.
Yeah, go for it.
Alright. This is the shortest Mac DeMarco album, and it was the first one I actually listened to. The production is super smooth and intriguing throughout the whole album, and Mac's soft vocal harmonies and melodies work well with the production on this album. Lyrically, he's okay on this album, as it's usually his style of lyrics, simping. There are brilliant parts in the production. For example, that plucked riff on the opening track is very nice, and I love listening to it. The title track is a smooth slow jam that sounds lush as fuck and relaxing. If I would describe this album, it would be a little relaxing, and I love relaxing music, so yeah, I'm all for it. I really enjoy this track as Mac's soft vocals again ride the beat. He sounds so good when he's on the right production, as most artists do. He has some of his best performances on here, some of his most creative stuff, and it's only known as his discography because it's not as good as his others, of course. And that outro is probably like the best outro. I'm joking, probably. Anyway, yeah, I'm done.
Yeah, I agree. At this point, the albums are all great in my opinion, and the rankings are just down to enjoyability rather than like one album's not that good. I think this album is incredibly consistent. It kind of feels like a direct follow-up to Solid Days in a lot of ways. I think he further embraces the ideas he like came up with and explored on that album. And while I do think it's very consistently good, I don't think it has as much, you know, highs, like high highs, as some of the albums that followed it. In my rankings, not in chronologically. I think it's very consistent. I think it's one that I definitely come back to from time to time because it has some incredible tracks. But when comparing it to some of his more, I think, refined works, I just can't justify putting it anywhere higher than 4th.
All right.
Right.
Best and worst tracks from another one. My favorite tracks were Without Me, The Way You'd Love Her, and No Other Hearts. And the worst, I'd probably say, well, not worst, least favorite, I would say, I've Been Waiting for Her.
My favourites are another one, The Way You Loved Her, A Heart Like Hers, and the worst, probably My House by the Water, because it's not even a song, it's just a 4-minute audio clip of the sea.
It's really cool, though.
I know it is, but it's more least favourite.
Okay, fair.
My favourite tracks were another one, just to put me down, A Heart Like Hers. I've been waiting for her and Without Me, and I really didn't have the heart to pick a least favourite, but I'd probably go with Otorio's pick if I had to.
Okay. I'm disappointed with that, okay.
I like the whole album.
Same.
No worse tracks.
Same, okay.
It's just consistent.
Alright, we are at the top 3 for our worst to best. We made it, boys.
Whoa.
And I've decided for just to preface this is the point where I love all these albums, and it's kind of, this is just down to personal preference, so I'm going to go with This Old Dog for my number 3 pick.
I'll also preface by saying between 3 and 2, there's pretty much nothing that separates them. It just comes down to very niche differences, and my number 3 pick is Salad Days.
My number 3 pick is 2.
I love how diverse our ranking is now.
Yeah.
All right.
For once.
All right. So This Old Dog is my 3rd favorite Mac DeMarco album, and this album feels a lot more low key and less like what his previous efforts were, as the production doesn't really feel as prevalent as it does on, say, Salad Days or 2. I do like that aspect, though. It does allow more cohesive and coherent songwriting, which I think this has some of Mac DeMarco's best songwriting. It's very emotional, it's very intimate, it's very topical, it's very personal, and I love that aspect of this album. It's a bit slow, but it's substituted with some, great, songwriting and vocals. There's some of my favorite moments of songwriting around here as well. Like, for example, My Old Man, Still Beating, This Old Dog, Drums From Yesterday. On the Level, Moonlight on the River, Watching Him Fade Away. Like, this album is songwriting heaven, in my opinion. It's soothing in a way as well. I like how soothing this album can be as well. I do enjoy the more, dreamy, synthy production, and a lot more emphasis on acoustics, too. And, overall, before I just, drag this on, I think this is an outstanding Mac DeMarco album. It's a welcomed part of his discography, and it's probably a defining moment for Mac DeMarco, in my opinion.
Yeah, as I said, there's very little that separates Salad Days and the album that follows it for me. It was quite a tough choice, but, this is what I decided to go for. To me, it definitely feels like his most complete album in a way, as in, the guitar isn't as high up in the mix as it is on previous releases, which kind of detracts some attention from it and spreads it out across, all the instrumentation, the whole atmosphere of the tracks, Mac's songwriting, everything is really allowed to shine on this, and it just feels like a more complete album in that way. I don't necessarily think that makes it his best, in my opinion. While it has pretty much no bad tracks whatsoever, I do think it has slightly less amazing tracks than some of the albums I ranked above it. And it was a very close toss-up between these picks, and I had to put Salad Days on 3rd, even though I love this album.
Breaks my heart.
How depressing. Anyway, let me talk about 2. Alright, this is what Mac's style has the potential for, and it's mostly fulfilled on this album. The production is really nice and interesting, and maybe a bit generic for the time. It's still enjoyable. There are a lot of good tracks on here, and I can see myself binge listening to this as it has a short runtime. I almost like every single track on here. Most of the production plays to its strengths. Nothing on this album I'm like, oh, that's terrible. Everything on this album has a redeeming factor to it. It could be the sweet vocals on a track like My Kind of Woman, or the production on a track like Freaking Out the Neighborhood. Everything adds up into this brilliant album that I'll enjoy for a while. Like most of Mac's material, sounds the same but doesn't really bore me to the point where I am dead. Anyway, yeah, great stuff.
I am dead. Okay.
That's cool.
Okay, best and worst tracks from each of our picks. My favorite tracks from This Old Dog are For the First Time, Moonlight on the River, One More Love Song, This Old Dog. The worst least favorite would probably have to be Sister. It's just too short of a track.
My favorite tracks were Salad Days, Blue Boy, Chamber of Reflection, obviously, Let Her Go, Goodbye Weekend, Passing Out Pieces. If I had to pick a least favorite, which I don't think there is any, I'd probably pick Treat Her Better, but I still really like that song.
Okay.
Alright, my best and worst tracks from 2 are... Best are My Kind of Woman, Freaking Out the Neighborhood, Ode to Viceroy, and the worst is Annie.
Top 2. And this is pretty fitting for my pick, because I chose 2.
I also chose 2.
I chose Salad Days.
Alright. Right, so, Otorio, do you want to go first? Since me and Michal are going to be talking about 2.
Alright, this album is pretty much 2 part 2, as Fantano said. There's some of Mac's best vocals on this album, and some of his best songs of his career. He comes into full force on this album, and I enjoy it a lot. There are a lot of good elements to this. The production is very nice, and there's some of the... Well, I just repeat myself. And there's some of his best production on here. Vocally, he's top notch. For example, the title track Salad Days is some of the best work Max has done vocally. Like some of the tracks off of Rock and Roll Nightclub and Here Comes the Cowboy, Mac can kind of sound sleep-inducing on some tracks, but on this album, nope, nothing like that. This is what Mac is trying to be doing and trying to replicate for a while, and he just hasn't got there yet, even though he kind of has. These are the tracks. Well, there are tracks such as Salad Days, Goodbye Weekend, and many more that catch this smooth and relaxing feeling Mac is trying to capture on this album, and the end is outstanding to say the least.
Alright, so
yeah.
I chose 2, and even though it's my second favourite Mac DeMarco album, it is still an absolutely amazing album. It has some of my favourite bits of, Mac DeMarco's performances, some of my favourite songwriting from Mac DeMarco, and some of my favourite, just instrumentals. I love this, atmosphere that the album goes for. It's very dreamy, it's very hazy. It's like, it's like you're just chilling at, just some random, club or something like that. Where they just play live music, and you're just chilling, you're just a bit high, and it's really, dreamy in that sense. It just makes you feel like you're in that kind of place, and I don't know why, I just love it that way. I love some of Mac DeMarco's most charismatic performances, like My Kind of Woman and Still Together and stuff like that. I love his vocals throughout this whole album, and there's moments of really, really good songwriting, especially on Ode to Viceroy, which is pretty funny considering he's just basically talking about his love for Viceroy cigarettes. And I've preferred the latter half of the album a bit more, and there's a great stretch of tracks from Ode to Viceroy all the way up to My Kind of Woman. Overall, I think that it is one of my favourite Mac DeMarco projects, and, it's my second favourite.
Yeah, I think 2 is really the point where he perfected his sound and aesthetic fully. It's completely baffling to me how this came out only 6 months after Rock and Roll Nightclub. Those 2 albums sound completely different. This one sounds so much more refined and more thought out and just overall better. The guitar work throughout is amazing. It's very crisp, it's very eccentric. It's perfectly mixed. It sounds brilliant, especially with a good pair of speakers or headphones. You can't beat listening to this album. Mac definitely sounds more confident in what he's doing. There's not any of that, odd vocalization. He's just doing his own thing, and he seems confident in it. Production throughout is fantastic. As I said, everything sounds great. All the instruments are allowed to shine, especially the guitar. But even with such good production, it still feels like a very raw, very in-your-face album. And it's got some of his biggest hits. It's almost like a Mac DeMarco greatest hits album at this point.
It's kind of true in a way.
With tracks like, yeah, and yeah, it's a brilliant album.
All right.
Very little to separate it from Salad Days for me, but
okay.
In the end, I did go for it.
All right, best and worst tracks from each of our picks. The best tracks for me off of 2 are My Kind of Woman, Still Together, The Stars Keep Calling My Name, and Ode to Viceroy. If I had to pick a least favorite, it would probably be Boza. Is that how you say it?
I don't know. My favorite tracks on 2 were Cooking Up Something Good, Freaking Out the Neighborhood, especially with the fucking story behind that track. Ode to Viceroy, My Kind of Woman, The Stars Keep on Calling My Name, Still Together. If I had to pick a least favorite, I'd probably go with Honey.
The best tracks on Salad Days are Salad Days, Goodbye Weekend, Passing Out Pieces, and the worst is probably Blue Boy.
Alright.
Do you guys know the story behind Freaking Out?
No, tell me.
Like back in 2012, he got really drunk on stage. I somewhere in the US, and he started blasting out, Beautiful Day by U2.
Yeah.
He started blasting out like full volume on every speaker in the fucking concert hall, and he got fully naked and he stuck a whole drumstick up his ass on stage.
God,
I've heard he did that. I've heard he did that before, but I didn't know in that context.
Yeah, and his mother was less than pleased, so he wrote "Freaking Out the Neighborhood" as an apology.
Oh, I can understand that. Isn't there a picture of him floating around the internet where he stuck his thumb up his ass too?
There's a whole video of the Beautiful Day drumstick debacle.
Okay, just give me 5 minutes here.
The fucking fact that he's playing Beautiful Day by U2 is the funniest part of that for me.
Okay, just give me 5 minutes, lads. I'm just gonna go do a little bit of research.
There's time for that after the episode.
Alright, so number 1 picks, my favorite Mac DeMarco album is Salad Days.
My favorite is easily This Old Dog.
My favorite is This Old Dog.
Mick, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first. Alright, so Salad Days, you're right in the observation that it is basically part 2, but at the same time, I think it is better than 2 in a way. It has, it's basically mastered what 2 is trying to do, and it made for more catchy, more dreamy, great production, and more charismatic performances from Mac DeMarco. I think it's very consistent. I love every track on this album. I think that the instrumentation is absolutely fantastic. I love the atmosphere of it. It sounds great. The jangliness of his guitars sound fantastic. There's moments of synthy tracks as well, and I think they sound amazing too. I think that there's some fantastic songwriting on this track too, like Treat Her Better, My Baby Stay, and Goodbye Weekend. I think those have some pretty decent songwriting. I don't think there's any bad tracks on here. I think it's very consistent. There's great vocal performances. Most of the tracks feel very psychedelic in a way, and I love that aspect of it, especially on Chamber of Reflection. And overall, there's so many amazing moments on Salad Days. I think that it's his most fun, his most consistent, his most enjoyable. I remember just listening to this for the first time, and I just had a big fat smile on my face the whole way through because of how fucking crisp and how good it was. And not to completely discredit the other albums that I mentioned, they're all great as well, but I just think Salad Days takes the cake for his best, in my opinion.
Do you want to go first with This Old Dog? Yeah, go for it.
Alright. This is Mac's 2017 release, and in my opinion, his best release. His personality shone through this album, and most of his efforts on here are probably the best we have seen from him. On this album, he takes his songwriting and turns it into sad, moody lyrics, which suits to his strengths. Where it hits him... that's not English in my notes. Hold on.
Take...
Alright, okay, right, let me restart. where it is he will either be saying, like, oh my god, freaking hell.
He wrote his notes in Chinese.
I did. I actually did. Alright. He has so many good songwriting elements where it is him saying that he's starting to be more like his dad, or he's writing a tribute to his half-sister Holly. There are some of Mac's most oh my god, I have actually wrote these in Chinese. Most expressive performances on here, and his vocals really shine through on tracks. My favourite Mac DeMarco track is on here, and I'm not going to spoil that yet. Everything about this is incredible, and in my opinion, this has most of Mac's best songs on it. He really finds his style and turns it into something he can only master. An absolute Mac masterclass, amazing.
Yeah.
Anyone not gonna?
Yeah, for me,
yippee!
Picking between Salad Days and 2 was hard for me, but this was always going to be number 1 for me. I feel like it sometimes gets forgotten when it comes to the best Mac DeMarco album conversation, but I think it has no right to be. I think it's an incredible album. It's Mac's most poignant album, his most personal. I think it's his most thought out and, impressive release as well, especially on the songwriting front. It's his best written album without a doubt. That's not to say that the production and the instrumentation isn't as great as on previous releases. It is. Guitar work is brilliant. Instrumentation throughout is very lush, very interesting, very atmospheric as well, and the synth work on the tracks that have it is fantastic, and he really has mastered that whole adding in like a few synth tracks thing he does. It's just, I think, this most consistent album. There isn't a bad track on it, like on a lot of albums there's not really any bad tracks, but there's also so many what I consider to be S tier Mac DeMarco tracks throughout this that it's just, listening to it is always as exciting as it was the first time. And it also has my favourite Mac DeMarco song in it, but I'll get to that in a bit.
We'll get to that now, actually. Alright,
Correct.
Best tracks for me off of Salad Days were Let My Baby Stay, Treat Her Better, Passing Out Pieces, and Chamber of Reflection. And the title track as well. I don't really have a least favourite at all. I love every song on this album, and I'm not picking a least favourite, you bastards.
Fair enough. I didn't pick one either. My favourite tracks were My Old Man, This Old Dog, Baby You're Out, On the Level, Still Beating, and my favourite Mac DeMarco song, One Another.
My
no least favourites.
But alright, my favourites were Dreams of Yesterday, My Old Man, Sister, One Other, and my favourite, Moonlight on the River. There aren't really any worse tracks, but if I had to pick one, I'd go for the First Time.
That hurts my feelings.
If I had to pick, I'd probably go for that.
Bro,
Right
that
now.
hurts my feelings. I'm sad. I am sad now.
Oh. I'm
It's
sorry.
okay. It's okay. Alright, that's it. We did it. That's our Mac DeMarco worst to best. Basically, do you wanna talk about the changes that we're gonna make to the normal episodes too, Michal?
Yeah, for sure. So basically, you might be seeing a lot more videos like this, worst to best, maybe even more things we haven't done before. Basically, more like lighthearted, fun things. Whereas the more serious, in-depth reviews that we do on 4 albums, we're not going to do it that way anymore. Instead, we're going to make a big monthly, humongous episode where we just talk about every album that we've heard the past month. Mostly albums from that month, but also some older ones. And we'll give not as much detail as we would with, reviewing every single track individually, because I just feel like that might get monotonous to listen to. It might wear us out having to do notes on every song. And this way we'll also get to talk about more albums that we love. We'll get to talk about them in a bit less detail, which means that it's probably going to be easier to consume for the listener as well. And overall, I think it'll be fun to have a big episode every month, and it would give us more room, more time to work on some of these podcasts with guests where we do worst to best, maybe even more fun stuff that we haven't tried before. possibly also stuff that doesn't include the podcast whatsoever. Me and Mick can work on our own reviews on our own channels. We can also work on collaborative projects here. And overall, it would just, I think, make the podcast better to listen to, better to experience, and it would also make it easier and more fulfilling in terms of other projects for us. So that's what we're going to be doing from now on. Stay tuned, because in late May, we're going to be recapping all the albums we've listened to since the last episode, where what albums did we talk? The Fiona Apple episode.
Yeah.
Every album we've heard since that was released this year, we'll be talking about there. And yeah, there's more worst to bests coming in the next weeks before then, so it's not like there's going to be no episodes between now and then.
So what are we going to do for our next episode?
I think we're going to do a Gorillaz worst to best.
Yeah.
But also in the coming weeks, we're going to be doing a car seat headrest worst to best with special guest David from the first 2 episodes of the podcast.
Yeah.
Who's a huge car seat headrest fan, so stay tuned for that as well. We're also going to work on a secret project together that isn't a podcast. We might get that out this month. Might take longer, but we're going to put some love into that. And yeah, that's basically all the updates we have. I would also consider maybe doing, not regularly, but stuff about other forms of media, since, taped cassette tapes don't necessarily have to relate to music. You can tape films on VCR. Maybe we could do a little film.
We could do thing. We could make the cassette tape brand more expansive into other forms of media. But since it's primarily focused on music, music will be a priority. But expansive into say movies or video games or something would be fun.
Yeah, don't expect any philosophy fucking videos about. I don't know.
Don't expect any fucking history of fucking Viceroy videos or some shit like that. None of that shit.
Yeah. History of Viceroy.
All right, that's about it. Yeah. So, Otorio, thanks for coming on today. Do you want to shout out anything at all?
Thank you very much.
Follow my YouTube channel, and you can follow my Twitter if you want.
All right.
I'll have both of those in the description.
Alright, I'll send it.
Alright, thanks for checking out today's episode of the Taped Podcast. What is your Mac DeMarco worst to best? Who did you agree with more on our rankings? And our necessary links will be in the description, including Otorio socials, the cassette tapes, Rate Your Music and Album of the Year, my channel, Michal's channel. And yeah, see ya.
Bye.
Bye, have a good day.